Another update. Those of you who are now joining us and would have noticed the sign, Dr. Trotz had to go to another location for better internet access. So he has just informed me that he has arrived and now trying to set things up. So hang in there for a little while longer. I'm sure this is going to be a much better show than we anticipated. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and once again, thank you for your patience. I am Selwyn Collins, your host of CWS Conversations with Selwyn. Tonight, something very interesting happened. As you've seen the notice on, if you had tried to tune into the show recently, that Dr. Truss had some issues with his internet connection at his former location, and we had to find another location for him. And he's finally here. So I am not going to do my usual introduction, preamble. I will get right into the show because we have lost some time. And so the gentleman next to me is Dr. Ulric, and in quotes, Neville Trotz. Dr. Trotz, good evening.
Good evening, Selwyn.
And welcome to CWS.
Well, pleasure to be on your show.
Dr. Trotz, I just want to go straight into it. Dr. Ulric Trotz, Deputy Director and Science Advisor, Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, Belize. A scientist by training, Dr. Trotz commenced his university education in Edinburgh and attained his doctorate in organic chemistry in Toronto, Canada. His career experiences and achievements are wide and varied. He has worked as Director, Science and Technology Division, Commonwealth Secretariat, 1993 to 97, as Secretary, Commonwealth Science Council, and Science Advisor to the Commonwealth Secretary General, 1991 to 1997. Secretary General, National Science Research Council, NSRC, Guyana, 1979 to 1991. Dean, Faculty of Natural Sciences, University of Guyana, 1976 to 1979. Director, Institute of Applied Sciences and Technology in Guyana, 1980 to 1991. Since 1997, Dr. Trotz, in his capacity as manager for the GEF-funded CPACC and MACC projects and the CEDA-funded ACCC project, has been given direction. I think we've just lost him. Has been given direction to the region's efforts to build capacity for climate change adaptation. Dr. Trotz was a review editor for Chapter 16 on SIDS in the fourth assessment report of the IPCC. He has presented several papers, lectures at a range of regional and international fora on climate change issues. Dr. Trotz now holds the post of Deputy Director and Science Advisor in the recently established Caribbean Community Climate Change Center. Dr. Trotz, this is indeed quite an honor for me to have you on here tonight. And so I want to start with, behind all the awards and accomplishments, who would you say is Dr. Ulric Trotz?
I didn't get that, Selwyn. Sorry.
Okay. I asked, behind the awards and accomplishments, who would you say is Dr. Ulric Trotz?
Well, just a citizen of the Caribbean who is trying to make some contribution to Caribbean development and the welfare of our peoples.
If you were not a scientist, what would be your career?
That's a difficult one. I might be a politician.
Really? I'm glad to hear that. I think I have a question for you later on. When you became Deputy Director and Science Advisor, Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, Belize, what was expected of you?
Well, our Climate Change Center basically is a unique center. I don't think that out there there's an expectation in this sense that the Caribbean political directorate and our people are not too au fait with what a climate change center could do. So we have to promote the center. We have to let the region basically learn through working with us the sort of services that we can provide.
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically, there is no expectation, which is good. We are now being judged by the sort of services we are providing for the region.
When you think of Guyana and being Guyanese, what comes to mind, and what do you love the most about being Guyanese?
About Guyana,
Yes, or about being.
its people, the rich traditions that we have over the years, and I hate to use the term, its great potential for development, which unfortunately we haven't realized as yet.
So, Dr. Trotz, what kind of research takes up a lot of your time these days?
Sorry, I didn't get that, Selvin.
What kind of research takes up your time, a lot of your time these days?
Well, now basically I'm not too much in research.
Mm-hmm.
I have been more or less studying this whole area of climate change and organizing for institutions to be able to generate the sort of information that we need for action in the region. But in my research days, I was very much involved in looking at what we call natural products chemistry, looking at how basically we can extract from plants, for instance, the sort of substances that would be useful in terms of contributing to our everyday needs.
As a young scientist lecturing at the University of Guyana, what was your vision for Guyana's development in science?
Well, we basically were committed to the whole theme of science and technology for development. And for that to be a realization, you had to build the necessary people power. I nearly said manpower, so I changed. We had to, the University of Guyana, for instance, was about building the human resources for development. And in science, we had done several things during my tenure. For one, we had something known as the National Science Research Council, which basically was set up to put in place institutional arrangements that would allow the country to address science and technology issues in a serious manner. Out of that Science Council, it was chaired by Dr. Irvin, who at the time was the Vice Chancellor of the university. We had three committees, a standards committee, we had an agricultural committee, and we had a science and industry committee. Out of those three committees, we had established three institutions which still stand today and contribute to the national development in Guyana. The first was the Bureau of Standards, coming out of the Standards Committee. The next was NARI, National Agricultural Research Institute, coming out of the Agricultural Committee. And the next was the Institute of Applied Science and Technology, coming out of the Science and Industry Committee. So we had three institutions established, and those institutions are still functioning today in Guyana and contributing to national development.
I seem to have lost your video for a bit, Dr. Trotz. But I still have your audio. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. I will take just like a.
Better without my visage on your screen.
As I said, we are resourceful people, so we will make this interview happen, this conversation happen tonight. I want to go back a little bit into your timeline, Dr. Trotz. What memories do you still indulge growing up in Guyana?
I am an unusual Guyanese because I'm from Bartica. You know, most people you ask overseas where they're from, they're either Berbice or Georgetown. I grew up in Bartica, and the memories I have of Bartica are really pleasant ones. And for instance, we had to, as kids, to make a trip down to the river every morning, several trips, to fill up drums of water for use during the day. But the incentive we had was that the last trip, before you filled your bucket, you had a swim in the river. That was your morning bath for school. My school days, my recollection of my days at Enterprise High School and then at Queen's College are very pleasant ones. They're still memories that I cherish. And later on in my working life, the opportunity I had to help to create things. The chemistry department at the University of Guyana, which basically was established by myself and a colleague, Neville Gurdata, who's now in Canada and recently was the registrar of Sir George Williams University. And the high point of, my memories has to be the whole era I was there establishing and managing the Institute of Applied Science and Technology. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So there are several memories.
If there's a particular eventful pre-independence day in Guyana that sticks out, can you share it with us?
Strange enough, before independence, I had just entered Queen's College, and the Guyana Constitution was suspended, and the British troops arrived in Guyana, and I was on the road outside of Gimpex, which was the PPP headquarters in those, well, their commercial property in Regent Street. And I was there with the crowd, and I was arrested by the police. I spent a night in Brickdam jail with Martin Carter, Rory Westmus, Rudy Locke, and a Norwegian sailor. And the next morning, I arrived at court with all of them in the Black Maria. You know the Black Maria?
No, I don't remember.
So that was, that's the black van that they take prisoners to court with. Yeah, so that for me was a most profound experience. It's been with me for my life. And were it not for the progressive attitude at school with Sandra Davies, who was the principal at the time, and the late Richard Alsop, I may not have had the chance to complete my career at Queen's.
I see. Can you take us back in time and introduce us to someone or ones who you admired and looked up to, and who would have influenced the man we have come to know as Dr. Ulric Trotz?
Well, my role models were basically from my school days. At Queen's particularly, Queen's was quite an inspiring sort of environment. And the chemistry teachers I had, Malcolm Boland, Cecil Barker, popularly known as book. Uh, they were my inspiration in those days. I never thought that I would have ended up with a career in science. I basically did science with the intention of doing medicine. But in those days, unless you had the money,
Yeah.
medicine was not basically a career you could pursue. So the next thing that happened was that I got the chemistry scholarship, and here I am. Years later, that's my profession.
Wow. What do you mean when you say paradise lost?
What did I?
What do you mean when you say paradise lost?
Oh, I was talking specifically about the potential that we had not only in Guyana but in the Caribbean to really make a leap forward with science and technology. Let me explain that to you. In Guyana, we have the Institute of Applied Science and Technology, which had expertise in certain areas. In Trinidad, we had a sister institution, the Caribbean Industrial Research Institute, CARIRI, still functional today. And in Jamaica, we had the Scientific Research Council. These were three strong scientific research institutions in the Caribbean, basically that had in those days some sort of national political support in their respective countries. And in the OECS countries, they had, each one of them had what was known in those days as a produce chemist labs. But all of these institutions were reasonably well staffed with scientific personnel, carrying out a lot of research, but we didn't have in the Caribbean the sort of institutional arrangements for us to move from research and prototype to something on the market. So that was a failing. But in those days, there was a lot of energy in science and technology in the region. And we were thinking basically of linking up the three major institutions. SRC in Jamaica would have been looking at food technology. CARIRI was basically electronics, and our institute had to do with ceramics and that type of research. So we had that infrastructure. But unfortunately, none of our institutions have been able to basically make the sort of impact that they were designed to make. Today, I find that the support for science and technology in the Caribbean is far less than what it was in the 70s and the 80s when we were fully operational. Mm-hmm. We make visits to Singapore, and we just never draw the inference that the basis for their tremendous development has been a significant investment in science and technology. I say nowadays that we don't have a culture of science and technology in the Caribbean, and that is one of our drawbacks. So when I say paradise lost, it refers to the fact that we were at the threshold of making a breakthrough so that S&T could make a significant contribution to the Caribbean development. It never happened, and it hasn't happened up to today.
1976 to 79, when you were a young scientist and dean of the Faculty of Natural Science at the University of Guyana, our country, Guyana, was with a young, brilliant, and charismatic leader, and was still trying to find its way as a newly independent country. Can you give us a glimpse into the government's attitude towards science at the time?
Well, I told you about the National Science Research Council. That because the government in those days were keen on, for instance, the Bureau of Standards was established under the aegis of that institution. My I.A.S.T, I still refer to it as my institute. I have a kind of a feeling of ownership for that institution. And NARI, the National Agricultural Research Institute. Now, they had tremendous political support. Our institute, the I.A.S.T, grew rapidly. We were established in 1981. And how we developed, in those days, the UNDP, the way they operated, the United Nations Development Program, they would have a country program, and that country program would have what they would call indicative program funds, which referred to the amount of money that they had under their umbrella for investment in the country. To sort of outline to you the political commitment to that of those days, the IPF, Guyana IPF, for about 4 consecutive years, 95% was assigned to science and technology because the government told UNDP that science and technology was a priority. So that was a tremendous commitment. And of course, you mentioned in those days, again, there was a very close sort of working relationship with the then President Forbes Burnham, because he basically believed in the power of S&T to transform Guyana's economy, looking basically at how we can use our natural resources for development. And he evinced a tremendous interest in the growth and performance of our institute. There was no political sort of pressure or anything like that. It was just an interest in basically following development through our research. So he had a very personal sort of connection with the center.
Did you have a personal relationship with him?
Yes, I did, and it was purely scientific. There was a small group of us, the late Winston Murray, Gussie Lee, who is still around, Skip Roberts, who is still around, and myself. It was every now and then we would be called for a meeting, and what we discussed basically were ideas. I mean, Gussie Lee was in charge of the Guyana Pharmaceutical Corporation at that time, and through his relationship with the I.A.S.T, we had put things like toothpaste using black sage, extracts from black sage as the active principle in that toothpaste. So we are always looking for ways in which we can do things. Let me give you an instance. We had done a tremendous amount of work on ceramics. Guyana had all of the raw materials for a ceramics industry. The only thing we lacked was what we call a ball clay. However, the research at the Institute was geared in getting our clays to behave like a ball clay, and we were reasonably successful, and that led to the establishment of the Vanceram tableware factory up at Coverdale, which was a women's venture run by the then WRSM. We then embarked on looking at sanitary ware, toilet bowls, cisterns, etc. And we were having great difficulty in basically getting over the research problems. There was an exhibition, one of our exhibitions, industrial exhibitions, due in Guyana, and President Burnham was very keen that we had a display from the center, from the institute. I'm mixing it up with my present institution, and that we should have bits of sanitary ware on display. About a week before, he called to find out what progress we were making with it. And I said, unfortunately, we are having problems. And I don't think that we will make the deadline. There was silence on the line. And then I heard him say, how am I going to go to my constituents and tell them that our leading scientists, leading research scientists at the Institute of Applied Science and Technology cannot make them some sit-upons? That was that. You can imagine that we did have those pieces ready for the exhibition because we worked day and night to make sure that, but that was the sort of relationship, the sort of probing, the pushing, the encouragement that we had. And as I said, the relationship was totally non-political and certainly inspired all of us who were involved to do our utmost best to sort of justify the faith that was placed in our ability to transform Guyana's economy.
What excited you? I mean, I know you've listed a lot of things, but what one particular thing excited you about that period?
The making a difference. We had this FCH mantra, feed, clothe, and house yourselves, which, of course, Selvin, is still very relevant today.
Yes.
The region imports billions of US dollars of food, which is untenable. And more recently, the Jagdeo initiative, President Jagdeo's initiative, is addressing food self-sufficiency, not for Guyana, but for the region, through investing in food production in Suriname, Guyana, and Belize as the focal points for that production. So we had a lot of exciting experiences. A couple of them you wouldn't believe. You remember we had a period when quite a few commodities were banned.
Yes.
One of the commodities a lot of Guyana doesn't know was the essential oil that bakers use to give our tennis roll that particular flavor. We were able to supply the bakeries in Georgetown with that commodity through a small pilot plant that we had at the Institute at the time, looking at extracting what we call the volatile oils from some of our plants. That ingredient for tennis roll comes from lemongrass. You know lemongrass?
I know lemongrass, of course.
Yes. The aroma from lemongrass, that is the principle, that is the thing that is used in the baking industry to make tennis roll give it that unique flavor. Then we had a big biogas program, which was one of our exciting programs. We had a couple of Chinese who were resident in Guyana. They were working at the center full time. And what they did was to use our local materials to design biogas digesters that would function in Guyana. And we built over 100 biogas digesters, right through from Essequibo up to Berbice. And outside of India and China, Guyana at that time, per capita, had the most biogas digesters in any country. And we were proud of that achievement. But let me tell you a little story about those digesters. When we started to move out into the villages and whatnot, we noticed, especially in Berbice, that there was a reticence of villagers to take it up. They wouldn't touch it, and we couldn't understand why. Until it was pointed out to us that the promotional video that we used in the villages, it was a Chinese village, was based on generating biogas from pig waste. And certainly in terms of minding pigs, you wouldn't find that in the Indian villages. And we had to switch. Well, we had to tell them that, look, the waste from your cows basically could do it.
Wow.
And they picked that up. So you see, you had to be so careful about the cultural sort of environment in which you're transferring technology. So, you know, we were looking at local material and seeing how we could add value to it. People don't know that we transformed a couple of rice factories. The energy supply came from the rice husk. Cayman Sankar's factory in the Essequibo Coast was one in which we did that work. Cow Island, the Williams grant in Cow Island, we provided them with the facilities to generate power in Cow Island from the wood waste from the sawmill. And in fact, they were generating so much that at one time we were discussing with the Canadian International Development Agency the possibility of running a cable from Cow Island to Bartica to supplement their power. So these were exciting days. The one that is the most controversial in terms of our FCH program in Guyana was basically when wheat and flour was banned, importation. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you were around in those days, Selwyn,
I
or
was.
if you had
I was.
memories of it.
Mm-hmm.
But for one thing, unfortunately, that action was interpreted as a political action. A lot of people don't know that it was in response to the abolishment by the American government of a privilege that all or most developing countries enjoy, something known as PL 480, where you purchase wheat from America at a concessionary price. If you look, it's very interesting, if you look at the Caribbean, every country, there's one facility that is common to all. That's a flour mill. Mm-hmm. And so you buy the PL 480 wheat, which you don't grow, and you mill it, and the flour is distributed. Guyana ran foul of the American administration because, of course, in those days, they were espousing the Cubans, and much more, the Cuban planes that were taking the Cuban troops to fight in Angola were refueling in Guyana. So that was a political act in the sense that that privilege was removed and the government's response was basically to ban wheat and flour. And our institute had the task of looking at alternative flours, and which we did. Every flour under the sun, cassava, yam, breadfruit, because and plantain flower. We failed, of course, in what we were doing because what we tried to do was to get these flowers to behave like wheaten flour. And there's no way that could happen. Mm-hmm. So we were defeated even before we started. But however, we characterize a lot of flowers. The cassava flower, for instance, now is used in some of the countries, Barbados, one in the Caribbean, to blend with wheaten flour. So we were able to promote the use of these flowers. If you go to the supermarkets now anywhere, you see a lot of rice flour products. What we didn't do was to use those flowers to make the sort of products that they can make. That, of course, would have had to be accompanied by a tremendous public education and outreach program. We didn't have the time. But it was a pretty exciting period where we linked with institution in Campinas in Brazil, I.A.S.T. At that time, they were one of the leading research organizations dealing with replacements for flour.
Wow. How did you leverage your position to advance science in the region as Secretary, Commonwealth Science Council, and Science Advisor to the Commonwealth Secretary General?
Well, the Science Council basically was designed to help countries, developing countries, link developing countries with the tremendous scientific expertise in UK, in Australia, in New Zealand, and to a certain extent in South Africa after they joined the Commonwealth. And not to mention a science powerhouse in the Commonwealth, India. And we were able, basically through the Commonwealth Science Council, to help a lot with the capacity building in the region. Specific training, getting attachments of our scientists to some of the premier institutions in these countries, in the UK, in Australia, etc., India, getting inputs, technical assistance, scientific technical assistance for the countries. And one of the things that we did, we had a total survey of the marine resources in the Caribbean, which entailed getting an Indian research ship, fully staffed, coming into the Caribbean, taking on regional staff and doing surveys. That exercise lasted for about 3 months. Mm-hmm. And so we were able to get some basic information for the first time on the sources of the Caribbean Sea. So it were things like that. Just before I left, the most exciting one that I had tried to set up but never was able to complete it was linking the University of West Indies Engineering Department in Trinidad and Tobago with engineering design centers in the UK, India, and South Africa. Now, engineering design is critical in terms of development. And, you know, moving from concept to functioning machinery. So this was something that we in the Caribbean were lacking in, and this would have been able to address that shortcoming. The other thing, while I was there, I was basically the point person at the Secretariat to deal with the Iwakrama Rainforest program in Guyana, which, of course, you know about. This is about Guyana had more or less allocated in the excess of 300,000 hectares of virgin tropical forests to the international community. And the purpose for that allocation was to help the research into the sustainable use of tropical forest resources. The paradigm here, the old paradigm about conservation was not touching, leaving it in its pristine state.
Right.
The new paradigm, of course, is sustainable, using it sustainably so that you satisfy the needs of our present generation while ensuring that the facility is there to serve incoming generations. I think this was the most exciting development in Guyana. Unfortunately, the international community has not stepped up to the plate. And Iwokrama right now is struggling for survival.
Oh, Dr. Trotz, when and how did you get involved in climate change?
That's a good question. When my contract was up in London with the Commonwealth Secretariat, I was coming back to the Caribbean. I had my eye at that time on, believe it or not, on Iwokrama, because they were just about to appoint a director, but I didn't get that job. At the same time, Professor Vishnu Prasad, who was, he was the CARICOM Secretariat in charge of the Economic Affairs Division, but had left and gone to the University of the West Indies to establish the University of the West Indies Center for Environment and Development. Now, just about that time, you had, which was about 1994, you had this big SIDS conference, Small Island Development States Environmental Conference in Barbados. And they came out with something known as the Barbados Program of Action, where one of the top priorities identified for our countries was climate change. Professor Prasad, Dr. Mark Griffith from Barbados, and a few others led the charge, lots of regional consultations, and as a result, we got our first project, the Caribbean Planning for Adaptation to Climate Change project, which was to have been run out of a regional project implementation unit in Barbados, executed by the Organization of American States and implemented by the World Bank. You had all those layers above the RPIU. And I was asked if I was interested in managing that, the CPAC project. So you can see I stumbled onto it. I went up to Washington, had the interview with the OAS, and I got the job. So I came back home. I knew nothing about climate change at the time, but as soon as I got involved, started to understand the implications and the seriousness of the issue, I just threw my whole energy into ensuring that as a region we are prepared for some of the impacts that we anticipate. So you might say that I stumbled in climate. It wasn't a deliberate act on my part. It's just being, I guess, at the right place at the right time.
I want to take a quick break, but I want to leave this question with you. When did you first start focusing on the effects of climate change on small island developing states and low-lying coastal areas like Belize and Guyana? So you can answer this when we get back. We're back with Dr. Trotz. Dr.
Yes,
Trotz,
yes, Selvin.
yes, the question is, when did you start focusing on the effects of climate change in small islands, developing states, and low-lying coastal areas like Belize and Guyana?
Well, from the very first day I took up the job as manager of the CPAC project, the Caribbean Planning for Adaptation to Climate Change. It was recognized by then because they had out at that time 2 global assessment reports on climate change impacts. And since small island development states and low-lying coastal states were identified as being extremely vulnerable to the impacts. Sea level rise, stronger hurricanes, changing weather patterns, etc. So our focus at the beginning of our work was to A, define the risk. By that I mean being able to look at the future and coming to some understanding as to what future climate in the Caribbean would be like. Then we looked at what will be vulnerable, all of our coastal development, all of our agriculture, our water, our health systems, our coastal ecosystems, our mangroves, our coral reefs. So all of these are vulnerable elements. And once those are identified, then we look at what the impacts of climate change, this new climate we're talking about, would be on these various sectors. As a result of an appreciation of the extent of the impact, then we fashion adaptation responses. That's why we talk about Caribbean planning for adaptation to climate change. Mm-hmm. What do we need to do, for instance, in Guyana to prevent flooding in the coastal plain as a result of sea level rise? What do we need to do with our water supplies in a region where in the islands, about 8 of the most water scarce countries in the world are in the Caribbean? And our projections on climate of the future show that we're going to get less rainfall. There's going to be a drier and hotter Caribbean, which means that those water systems are going to be under stress. So how are you going to deal with water scarcity? How do you deal with the problems with agriculture? In Guyana, we had a very unique problem from sea level rise, where we're seeing saltwater intrusion into our estuaries higher up than normal. So the rice farmers in Mahaika, Maikoni, and the Bari, they use the water from the river to irrigate their crops, but the salinity is high. And so NARI, National Agricultural Research Institute, has been for some time now carrying out research on salt-tolerant varieties of rice. So this is the sort of thing that we're talking about. And that's the work that we've been engaged in. Just let me say that there is a moral issue in the whole climate change discussion. The reason we are in this predicament is as a result of the pattern of development of the developed world since the Industrial Revolution. It's a development based on a massive consumption of fossil fuels. In terms of what we call the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the Caribbean as a whole contribute less than 0.1% to that global budget. But nevertheless, we are what they call the mine canaries of climate change. We are going to be feeling the impacts first and hardest. So we are in a constant constant argument and hassle at the international level in the negotiations to basically say that the developed world has a responsibility to provide some of those resources we need to adapt to climate change. So on the political level, that is the fight, but the technical level, we are trying to get the information base on which we can fashion responses to climate change in the Caribbean.
If you were asked by the government of Guyana for 3 environmental recommendations, what would they be?
Right now, the first one basically definitely has to do with our forests, which is a critical resource. To make sure that any activity in the forest, whether it be mining or forestry, complies with certain strict international standards that ensures that our forest stands are not destroyed. So I think that is critical. The other one has to do, unfortunately, with the sanitation. It distresses me whenever I go home these days to see the state of Georgetown and to the attitude of a lot of our people to the disposal of rubbish. So sanitation, some strict sanitation. I mean, if you go to Singapore and you drop chewing gum on the road, you know, that could get you a fine and a flogging. We have to address this whole question of sanitation. It has impacts on health, etc. So those are 2. You asked for 3.
For 3, yes.
I guess the other one has to do with one of our richest resources, which is water and pollution, and ensuring that our water is available for uses in manufacturing, domestic use, etc. So those are 2 critical resources, our forestry and our water. And the other one, of course, the general environment, which is, you know, without that clean environment, I think we are really exposing ourselves to some serious problems.
Mm-hmm. What are some funding strategies the region uses to finance some of its climate change projects?
I'm glad you asked that. Now, as you know, right now our region is strapped for finance. A lot of our countries, their debt to revenue ratio is quite unfavorable, and lots of them cannot borrow or get new finance. Our center, when we proposed the formation of the center, we took a very bold step by telling governments that they don't need to give us a subvention. We are the only regional institution that is not supported by governments. And the reason for that was at the time when we had put the proposal to governments for the establishment of the center, the heads of government were discussing the viability of keeping CARDI, the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute, which is a regional institution. They were discussing the feasibility of keeping that open because they couldn't afford the subventions. So we took the bold step. And we keep the center alive by executing projects for the donor agencies. Remember when I spoke about CPAC, I said it was executed by the OAS,
Yes.
implemented by the World Bank. Now we have a climate change center. Money comes to the center directly from the donors without the intermediate layers of the international organizations like UNDP, UNEP, etc. Now, this is important, and there is money being made available for climate change. There is, at the moment, they are establishing what is known as the Green Climate Fund, the GCF. It is hoped that by 2020, it will be capitalized at the level of $100 billion per year. We hope that it's going to be capitalized this year with about $10 billion to start with. So this is the new money that is available. And so what we are doing is working with countries to prepare what we call a portfolio of projects which will be eligible for climate financing. It's so let me give you an example. Water. A lot of our water infrastructure in the region is in a state of disrepair. Some countries, for instance, the pure water that they generate, about 60% of it is lost in transmission to the user, leakage. When our work in climate change says that water is a critical resource and that this resource basically will be scarce in the future. So anything that you can do to sort of ensure that the water supply is available, etc., then you can couch the rehabilitation of your water sector infrastructure as an adaptation to climate change issue, and thus it's eligible for climate financing. Right now, I'm here in Grenada because we have two big water projects which the center found the money for. We are basically looking for money to help countries to address these issues. And it's in the islands of Carriacou and Petite Martinique, where basically there is no pipe water and water has sometimes to be ferried in. We are putting up two saltwater reverse osmosis plants in these two islands. And the unique thing about these two plants is that they're going to be totally powered by solar energy, photovoltaic power. All of the facilities are here, and we are here and to ensure that they are installed and working. Not only that, we have provided the resources so that there's a hookup between the facility, the SWRO, and the community, so that at the end of this project, those two communities will be getting piped water as a result of the saltwater reverse osmosis plants. This is just to give you an example. Mm-hmm. So our role basically is to pursue the climate funds, which, as I said, are the only funds becoming available. One of the problems we have in the region too is that some of our countries have been graduated from to middle income countries. As a result of that designation, they're no longer eligible for a set of concessionary loans that were formerly available. Now, this is very unfortunate, and we are trying to fight that redesignation of status. The the metric that is utilized for that graduation is GDP per capita. Unfortunately, it doesn't take into account the distribution of that wealth. So there's a small group at the top of that chain who really, as a result of their earnings, distort the truth about the poverty that lies down below. So we are hoping to convince the international community to use a new metric to classify these countries. All these are issues, you see, unfortunately, a lot of the things that we should be doing with climate change, looking at our reservoirs, redesigning them in the face of changing weather patterns, looking at our agriculture, drip irrigation, etc., looking at our sea defenses, looking at our mangroves. It's not rocket science, Selwyn. We know in many instances what should be done to protect the Caribbean from the projected impacts of climate change, but we don't have the resources to do it. If you take Amsterdam, for instance, the Dutch, they have put in flood defenses for a 1 in 1,000 year event. Here in the Caribbean, we can hardly scrape the resources to protect our people from a 1 in 5 year event. So it's this disparity in terms of resources that puts us in this very vulnerable situation. And that's what we are trying to address through the establishment of the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund. As I say, this is the only new money that is appearing on the funding horizon.
And what was the trigger that got that money flowing to your organization?
Hello?
What was the trigger? What was in what was responsible for that money coming your way?
No, the fact is that we have been working for quite some time now. In fact, you know, we are way ahead of the game as far as developing countries are concerned. For instance, under the convention, they had agreed that developing countries should establish what they call centers of excellence to deal with climate change. We are the only center of excellence established so far in any developing countries with a sole mandate to deal with climate change. So our work basically is to place our regions in a strategic position where they can access climate funds. And our countries are catching on. Jamaica, for instance, they get funds now through what is known as a national implementing entity for the Adaptation Fund. This is the Planning Institute of Jamaica. So they're getting direct disbursements from the Adaptation Fund to Jamaica through the PIOJ. And it's interesting, at the last intercessional of heads, the intercessional was held earlier this year, and it was in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Prime Minister Portia Simpson made that remark that the only new money that Jamaica can access now, given the strict restrictions, the restrictions placed on them by this IMF agreement, is climate money. So this is what we're trying to tell our region, that let us work together to strategically sort of fashion some of your national development priorities in such a way that we can get concessionary finance under the umbrella of climate financing to help you to accomplish the objectives of those national development goals.
Mignon and John asked, do you believe the Caribbean, particularly the small islands, are sensitized to the effects of climate change and the expected rises in sea levels? What do you think they should be doing starting now?
Well, surprisingly enough, Selvin, yes. Now, at the international level, we negotiate under the umbrella of I.A.S.T, the Association of Small Island States. And the Caribbean has been a leader in terms of defining the positions that we take at the international negotiations. All of our countries, as a result of the work we've been doing over the years, all of our countries have national climate change committees. They all have a national climate change focal point. At the institutional level, I think that there is a high sensitivity now to climate change. Our challenge, though, is at the level of our populace. This is the big challenge that we face because, you know, without that groundswell of support from the electorate, we might not get the type of political action that is required for the transformation of the Caribbean economy. Mm-hmm. We have a regional strategy that has been approved by heads of government. We have an implementation plan for that strategy that has been approved by heads of government. And we are now rolling it out in the region. So I would say that we've made considerable progress since we started, but we still would like to see some political muscle behind some of the actions that we need to take as a region.
Mm-hmm. And Raphael said, thank you, Dr. Trotz, for your conversation with Selvin. What are the measurable effects of climate change in the Caribbean? What is the new paradigm of STEM development in Guyana and the Caribbean?
Well, we must distinguish between, things that we are seeing now and what we call slow onset events. One of our challenges is that when we speak about climate change in the science, we look at projections from our computer models for time slices like 2020 to 2030, 2040 to 2050, going on to the end of the century. So the discussion basically takes place in this sort of futuristic type of environment. Now, we're talking to political people whose time horizon is 5 years between elections. So therein is a challenge. But right now in the Caribbean, we are living in a warmer Caribbean. Weather patterns have been disrupted. Normally, for instance, you're accustomed to dry season, wet season, dry season, wet season, say in Guyana. That is no longer the case, causing a lot of disruption, say, with the rice industry. Then we get these extreme events, which is becoming a feature of the Caribbean. The last one was on Christmas Eve Day in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, and Dominica, where in the space of 1 day, you get as much rainfall as you will normally get in the space of 3 months. So we're seeing these change weather patterns. There's an increase in temperature. Now, sea level rise is a bit more invidious. It is happening. We have sea level gauges out, and definitely sea level is rising. But the impacts of that basically are felt, for instance, right now, if you have a hurricane. That few millimeters of sea level rise translates into significant storm surge if you have a hurricane. So sea level rise has to be a concern. Just yesterday I was talking with a colleague from Grenada and was telling me about an atoll which was some way off Carriacou, which years ago his family would go there and they would swim, etc. He says, but now it's totally covered. So sea level rise is something we need to worry about, and the impacts it will have on our coastal infrastructure, on our coastal things like ecosystems, like our mangroves. Now, the other thing is that seawater is definitely warmer than it used to be. And as a result, we are seeing bleaching of our coral reefs. Now, the coral reef is a critical ecosystem in terms of providing shoreline protection and an important habitat for fisheries. And we're very concerned about the deterioration of our coral reef ecosystems in the Caribbean because a significant percentage of our protein intake comes from the marine environment. And if the reefs go, that's the habitat, there goes the fisheries, and it will have some very negative effects on the nutritional integrity of our population.
Dr. Trotz, I want to take another quick break so you can get to drink some water and so on, but I want to leave this question with you. What are your real concerns, your deep concerns and fears about the future of Guyana, Belize, and the Caribbean region regarding climate change? So we'll take a quick break.
Right.
We are back. Dr. Trotz, the question, yes, the question I asked before the break was, what are your real concerns and fears about the future of Guyana, Belize, and the Caribbean region regarding climate change?
Well, one of the first has to be our coastal environment, where we're seeing a lot of erosion and the potential basically for flooding, for inundation. This, of course, would be a direct result of sea level rise. We're also seeing an increased intensity of storms. Luckily in Guyana we live in the flat, and well, we'll get floods, but in countries like Dominica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, has happened with the last extreme event they had, that translates into mudslides and loss of property, loss of life. So coastal infrastructure is very exposed, and we need to find ways of protecting that infrastructure. Our agriculture is at risk. As I said, you have to look at agriculture now in a changing climate. The assumptions our farmers took about their plants, their planting seasons, etc., those have to be changed. Water is going to be a critical issue, and so we have to look at ways in which we can carry out agriculture while conserving water. This is why drip irrigation and protected agriculture, all these are new areas that we are moving to. Guyana doesn't have coral reefs, but the coral reefs are of critical importance to the islands. And the reefs are under stress not only from the rise in seawater temperature, but the tremendous amount of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere that is being absorbed by the sea is more or less causing a change in the pH. In more common parlance, seawater is becoming a little bit more acid. So you could think about the implications that would have for any shell fish, any crustacean, crabs, lobsters. You might see them evolving to lobsters without shells. So these are issues. Our health, the conditions being more favorable for vector-borne diseases, dengue, malaria, this new one that is creating havoc now in the Caribbean. I don't know if I can get the pronunciation correct. Chikungunya. I just prompted chikungunya, yes. So the health issue, heat stress, for instance, especially for our older folk. Your health, agriculture, your water, your ecosystems, your infrastructure, all of these basically spell, disaster for the Caribbean if we don't start to address them, not individually, but as a region, working together.
What are some positive trends you are noticing among scientists in the region that you admire?
What are they?
What are some positive trends you're noticing about scientists among scientists in the region that you admire?
Well, in that the scientific community is now becoming aware of the need for them not only to do science for peer-reviewed journals and for furthering their careers, and I'm including the academic community here, but coming to the realization that they have to use their science to help our people to improve their lot. They have to apply science to national and regional problems and look for solutions. And one interesting feature is this spirit of entrepreneurship that I've seen in some of my colleagues, which I hope will be encouraged and which will, I think the scientific community has to take the lead in terms of investments in activities in the region that are based on science and technology. As I said, the region doesn't have a culture for that. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about the private sector in the region, I'm afraid to say it, but essentially it's a merchant private sector, buying and selling and making a hell of a lot of money. But investing in innovation, taking that risk, we don't have that attitude. And hopefully my younger, energetic, informed scientists, scientific brothers and sisters will take the lead and show the Caribbean basically that there is another path to prosperity.
Talking about younger and energetic, Maya asked, what message are Guyanese getting with new developments, many times by those in political power, close to the flood zones, by the seawall, with much impervious areas, definitely not climate sensible?
That is a feature in Guyana, and the thing is that one should lead by example. And that certainly isn't happening. Throughout the Caribbean, we still see mangroves being pulled down to erect 4 or 5-star hotels. There are a couple of developments now in the Caribbean, basically one in Jamaica, Goat Island, and one in Antigua, where massive hotel developments are earmarked in in environmentally sensitive areas. In Guyana, certainly I'm very unhappy with what I've been seeing in the press recently about exploitation of logs and the impacts. Basically, in this day and age, exporting logs, I can't understand it. Value added has to be our theme. I don't understand how you could export our logs to India and China to create employment there, whilst our people are still struggling to make a living. And the whole mining industry, we are in some sort of agreement with the Norwegians, which has as its basis reward for the sustainable management of our forests. I was noticing just recently that Guyana has lost $20 million from the Norwegian fund as a result of the fact that the deforestation over the last measuring period was higher than was agreed. So this is a distressing trend. The fact that we could live in a city like Georgetown is also a very distressing trend. The fact that, all of our drainage is clogged up is a distressing trend, because certainly with climate change, what we are saying is that all these impacts that you're now experiencing because of bad management of some of the environmental issues, climate change is going to exacerbate these impacts and make them worse. So we need to get our respective houses in order.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Trotz, what advice do you have for young people who want to become scientists?
I would tell them basically to pursue it with all vigor. The opportunities are there now, and they should take advantage of it. In my day, as I mentioned earlier, I went into Queen's College in middle school. I started my secondary education in a school no longer existent, but Enterprise High School. You had the Enterprise High School, the Tutorial High School, and Central High School. These were high schools. But we never did science. And I got a middle school scholarship to Queen's College, and believe it or not, I arrived at Queen's to go into the lower six, to do English, economics, and geography. I had my books bought. And I went into the school that morning, and I saw a few of my other secondary school friends from Central High School, from Tutorial, who didn't win a middle school scholarship, but they were there in Queen's College uniform. So I inquired what they were doing there, and I found out that Sanga Davies, one of the great headmasters Queen's has had started something called the Fifth Remove, which allowed people like me, who got the what would be equivalent to your ordinary level GC, to come into Queen's and to start science. That's how I started science. I dropped all the geography and economics books that I had and went straight into the science class. 1 year in the remove to do 4 science subjects, the ordinary level, and the next 2 years in the sixth form. So now, if you have an opportunity for science, we're talking about a new paradigm, a new world, where science and technology and knowledge-based activities are going to be the very sort of foundation of development. So the quicker we shift gear and ensure that our young people are engaged and are provided with the opportunities and the facilities to get a sound scientific education, I think it will be well worth any investment. And I must congratulate the the work that is being done. Maya must forgive me because after such a long chat, I can't remember the acronym, but it's SPICE. I can't remember, but the idea is that students from the Caribbean are in a workshop in Barbados where they are exposed to the leading edge science in mathematics and science, even robotics. Basically, this is the way we have to go. We can't more or less allow the rest of the world to march forward and leave us basically in the age of darkness. Science and technology is our future.
What is your favorite scientific discovery?
My favorite scientific
Discovery.
discovery?
Hmm.
Oh, well, on the whole, there have been so many of them, Selwyn. But I think basically the one that I admire really is the one that had to do with the Green Revolution in India, and which has revolutionized agriculture the world over. Food is such a basic commodity that any sort of innovation that allows us to ensure that there's an adequate food supply for the world's population, I think must move to the top. You see, my inclination is again science and technology for people.
I see. And Dr. Trotz, when are you most happy?
It's very difficult. You know, I have developed an attitude in life that I'm always happy. I'm happy with my job. I'm exceptionally happy with my job.
Mm.
And this is why I could continue working even with this gray mane that I have. I'm happy when I'm with my family, with my children. I'm happy when I go to Guyana. From the time I step off of the plane, just to put my foot in that soil, it's a different feeling, regardless of what the status of Guyanese environment or anything is. Being home for me is a very happy occasion.
Looking back on your career, what would you consider are some satisfactions?
I think the number of people that I've taught and the number of them who have made very successful careers in science and technology, and they're all over the world. And I run into them from time to time. The fact that people will meet you and say, you know, we really appreciate what you did for us, because were it not for you, I wouldn't be where I am today. There's nothing more satisfying than that, than being appreciated.
As a young scientist, if I may take you back there, what do you wish you knew then that you know now?
You know, Selwyn, I always said that my perception of paradise is that I would be back in the sixth form of Queens right now with all the knowledge I've accumulated. That would be awesome, wouldn't it?
That will certainly be. Maya just said the acronym is SPICE, SPISE, and from the Caribbean Science Foundation.
Oh, SPY, yes, that's it. The thing is that in terms of that last question, I wish I had a better appreciation of the value of time. Because looking back, you know, I really wasted a lot of time. And time is a precious commodity.
Talking about time, how do you balance all the demands of your work with leisure, and what do you do for fun or to relax?
Uh, I, I nowadays precious little.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'm excited about my work, and I find, you know, climate change science is evolving at such a rapid rate that to remain relevant, I have to spend a lot of time basically reading. But I relax listening to music. Uh, I relax most when I'm with any of my children. They make sure I do. And that's about it.
What?
I got myself a treadmill recently and I'm trying to relax in it. But this is after several complaints about my portly middle.
What are the main unanswered questions for you, and what would you like to see in future research?
Well, for me right now, for future, one of the things, for instance, is particularly in I haven't been close to the research area in my chemistry, but certainly in climate change, one of the biggest challenges is something called carbon capture and storage. That is how you could burn fossil fuels, generate carbon dioxide, and not put it into the atmosphere. So that if we make that breakthrough, it basically helps to address the climate change issue. Of course, diseases, cancer. I had people very close to me who suffered from died from cancer. So in the medical field, any breakthrough in cancer research and research on Alzheimer's, the Caribbean now is suffering, population is suffering from diabetes and blood pressure. I would like to see medical research at a stage where these are no longer health problems, but that is, somewhere down the line. I'm very concerned now about this Ebola outbreak
Mm-hmm.
in West Africa. Very concerned about it, and I hear in the news that they're experimenting with some vaccines, but health issues are critical.
Dr. Trotz, what are you most proud of?
Uh, in terms of accomplishment,
Yes.
I think two things. My teaching career at the University of Guyana, which was for me one of my most rewarding experiences, and the establishment of the Institute of Applied Science and Technology in Guyana.
Mm-hmm.
I regard those as two of my outstanding contributions.
What drives you and makes you get up every day and do what you do?
A belief in what I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
and a belief that I am, in my own little way, contributing to the welfare of the people of the Caribbean, the welfare of my children, whose future basically is being compromised by the things we are doing today.
Mm-hmm. And Maya said or asked, with the many discussions on marijuana legislation in the Caribbean and elsewhere in the world, what should Caribbean scientists be doing to be an active part of this work?
You know, unfortunately for us, we have to take our cue in terms of some of these issues from the developed world. Well, let me tell you, marijuana research has been going on in the Caribbean for some time ago. There was one Professor West at the University of the West Indies who extracted what we call the active principle, cannabisol, from marijuana and marketed in Jamaica an eye drop which was prescribed for glaucoma. I know that it works because I had glaucoma, and when I was at the Commonwealth Secretariat, I was registered with a hospital in London, and for the few years that I remained in London, they didn't know I was using cannabisol. They thought I was on their eye drops. So it works. Something, Selwyn, I tell people that just sit and reflect on how many of our Rastas wear spectacles.
I'm sorry.
No, just think about it. Night vision.
Okay. Oh, that's.
We are facing a serious social challenge. Marijuana has been so criminalized in our society that I think our leaders are finding very, very difficult to make that psychological adjustment, that quantum leap to sort of stop criminalizing our people as a result of, possessing a very modest amount of marijuana.
Do you think the scientific community and organizations that you were part of can help to influence their behavior in that direction?
Well, I don't think it's a scientific fact. The science is there. The evidence is there that the fears that we had about marijuana aren't as justified as we thought they were. I don't know what we could do. It's not so much a scientific question now, Selwyn. It's a social and it's more of a social issue. And there, of course, the Caribbean is very religious, and you'd expect some pushback from the church. From a purely scientific point of view, I don't see anything wrong with enacting laws like they're enacting now in the USA, in the Caribbean, but that decision will not be based on science. It's going to be a political decision that is very much sort of steeped in Caribbean social habits and social acceptance.
In the chat room, GY to NY said, "That is so true." Karen G said, "I like that. Rasta now wear glasses." And interested listener, profound observation, real, Ariel, Rastas and glasses, smiles. Karen G, they really want to criminalize it so that you would leave it alone so that they will package, commercialize, and sell to you for a serious profit and millions like coconut water and the products. Dr. Trotz, finish the sentence. I look forward to Sunday evenings too.
Listen to my favorite bits of music, to relax with a glass of wine and to reflect on the week gone by and anticipate the week to come.
What are you most thankful for?
Health, life, loving children, family. I'm blessed.
If you could go back in time, what would you tell that 16-year-old boy?
What would I tell?
That 16-year-old boy.
Stop wasting time, fella, and spend more time with your books.
Dr. Trotz, go ahead. Sorry.
No,
That's it?
That's what I would do. I think I wasted the hell of. We all do.
Yes.
We all do.
I have to ask you this question. I know you love Guyana. You mentioned it several times. But I hope I'm not putting you on the spot with this one. If you had to curl up somewhere or lay down somewhere in a hammock and with a book and your favorite drink and your favorite music, where would this place be? What book will you be reading? What will you be drinking? And what would you be listening to?
This would be slung between two trees somewhere on Bamford Hill in Bartica. It's a beautiful view from Bamford Hill. You see the Essequibo, Mazaruni, and Cuyuni coming together.
Wow.
You know, in your geography days, they taught you at the confluence of the Mazaruni, Cuyuni, and Essequibo. To see that, basically, that merging of rivers is a kind of a therapeutic thing. It's about unity, about coming together. So that's where I have my hammock. I probably, these days I'll be reading climate change, but in those days I'll probably be reading history will absolve me. Fidel Castro's book, which a most inspiring chronicle. I will be, and I hate to disappoint my rum drinking friends, I'll be sipping one of the finest single malts. And hopefully it will be early morning and I'll be listening to Cat Stevens sing Morning is Broken. You know that song?
Yes, sir. Of course.
Yeah. So there you have it. It's very simple.
Well, this question I ask all my guests, what makes you laugh out loud?
I have a pretty fickle sense of humor. And a good story, a good joke.
Uh-huh.
I can see the funny side in most things, and I think that's what helps me. Remember I told you earlier that I'm happy most of the time.
Yes.
I look for the humorous side of life.
I like
Even
that.
when I'm in a tremendous predicament.
I like that. Dr. Trotz, I want to thank you so very much for appearing on CWS. I'm honored and I'm very delighted. This conversation was very informative. I learned a lot. And in spite of the snafu that we had early on, it just demonstrated how very resourceful we can be as Guyanese. And thank you for carrying the torch of innovation and in your pursuit for a better place for our children and our future generation in the region, and your fight with climate change. Thank you so very much for everything you've contributed to our country.
Thank you, Selwyn. And I'd just like to say that I should thank you for the privilege of appearing on your show. It was the most delightful experience.
You're quite welcome. If before you leave, if I may read two more comments in the chat room. Patrick said, "Great discussion, Selwyn. Great and very engaging guest." Thank you, Patrick. And Karen G said, "You still have that sense of humor you so often showed at UG." I guess this is one of your students, Dr. Trotz.
Yes, most likely retired.
Well, thank you very much, and please extend my thank you to the home, to Anande and her husband for
Yes, I
allowing
will.
us to use her home this evening.
Yeah, that's very generous of her.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Selden,
All right,
thanks, and good night.
good night, Dr. Trotz.
Right.